Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Olly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, my tips for how to avoid and beat reading slumps. So reading slumps are terrible, aren't they? Everyone hates reading slumps, and rightly so. There's nothing worse as a reader than that feeling of just not being able to settle with a book. And you know, in a true slump, not being able to settle with multiple books in a row. It's really, really dispiriting. If you're someone like me who reads every day, not being able to read or not getting satisfaction from reading every day is something that's, that's painful. It's a horrible, horrible thing. I'm quite fortunate in that I tend not to suffer from reading slumps, but I did nearly fall into one recently. So that experience made me reflect on it a bit and gave me some ideas for this video, which I wanted to talk about with all of you. So I think there are reasons why I am less likely to fall into reading slumps than some other people. So I thought it would be useful to talk about that. And I also, that made me think about tips for getting out of reading slumps. And the two do go hand in hand to an extent. So I wanted to talk about that as well. So let me talk about this slump I had recently, or near slump. I didn't fully fall into a slump. So the last time I had what I would call a full-on reading slump was in 2020 when I had COVID for the first time. And I spent probably a week or two when I just couldn't settle with any book at all. I tried 5 or 6 different books during that period and none of them worked for me. I'd read like 10 pages or so and just not be engaged, not be taking in the story, and would then try something else and have the same experience. And what I ended up doing during that period was playing video games instead. I played Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Switch and really, really enjoyed it. I got out of my reading slump again before finishing that game. So I still, 4 years later, haven't finished it. Maybe I'll go back to it at some point. But anyway, that's something I did to get me through that reading slump. So let me talk quickly then about why I think I tend not to fall into reading slumps. And I think the reason is that as a reader, I'm easy on myself, yeah? I don't beat myself up. I don't push myself all the time to try and read difficult books or challenging books or different kinds of books. I am quite comfortable reading books that I know I'm going to enjoy. Now, I do sometimes challenge myself. I do sometimes read more difficult books. I'm reading one at the moment, actually. But generally speaking, my reading diet is relatively light. Now, everyone's reading diet will be different and should be different. But I think it's important not to have a reading diet that's just full of really literary stuff. If all you ever read is like Booker winners, you're probably going to get bored after a while. You need a bit of variety in there. You need to have a snack every so often rather than just eating big sumptuous meals. So that's definitely one tip. And don't beat yourself up. If you're reading a book that everyone is raving about and it just doesn't work for you, just don't get it. Don't beat yourself up about it. Every reader is different. Every book will be different for every reader, and you shouldn't feel that you are failing in some way if you try and read a book and it doesn't work for you. Just because a book's been nominated for the Booker Prize or whatever doesn't mean it's the right book for you. So have a bit of variety. Don't beat yourself up. But also be prepared to DNF. And this kind of goes with that not beating yourself up one. If you're not enjoying a book, stop reading it. Put it to one side. Maybe go back to it in another, the following month or something like that. But don't persevere with it. Don't make yourself read a book that you're really not enjoying, because that can drive you into a slump. I really, really think that. I really think that pressurising ourselves to read books that we're not enjoying is a bad thing to do, because it can suck the joy out of reading. So like I say, maybe put it to one side, read something fun that you know you're going to enjoy, and then go back to it at a later date. DNFing doesn't mean you're never going to finish the book. It just means it's not the right time for you in that book. And the other thing is, and this again goes with that point about not beating yourself up. You don't have to understand everything about a book in order to enjoy it. So when I read books, this is like me being completely honest with all of you. I don't understand everything in every book I read. There are some books where, I just don't get parts of it. I don't get what the author is trying to get at with some things. But that doesn't necessarily ruin my enjoyment of the book. I can still have fun with the book without enjoying everything that happened. So if I'm reading a book and I think I don't really get what that meant, I don't necessarily go back and read it again or try and research it and figure out what was supposed to be going on. I just move on and let the story carry me on. If the story's good enough, it will carry you through the book. And the fact you may not have picked up on everything isn't necessarily that big a deal. That was certainly the experience I had with House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski, which is a fantastically complicated book, which some people spend weeks and weeks reading because they pore over every detail and feel like they need to understand every detail. I read House of Leaves like I read every book. I just read it for the story and I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. Now, my understanding of that book and appreciation of that book may be different from people who have spent longer with it, but that doesn't mean it's not it doesn't mean my experience with that book wasn't a good experience. So yeah, I really think that's probably my main my main piece of advice with reading generally is don't beat yourself up. Just enjoy the experience of reading. Enjoy the books you read, and don't worry if you don't enjoy books just because everyone else seems to be. So those are some tips or some habits, some reading habits I have that I think make me less likely to fall into reading slumps. In terms of if you do fall into a reading slump, what should you do? So I think there are two reasons why people fall into reading slumps. The first one is they're reading wrong books, which I've talked about. The second one is reading is just not the thing they should be doing at that moment in time. And that was certainly my experience when I had COVID. So when I had COVID that time, my brain was not working in the same way that it normally does. I couldn't concentrate on books. And there can be multiple reasons in people's lives why that might be the case. It could be that you've got, it could be you've had something horrible happen in your life. It could be you're preoccupied with things at work. There will be times when you just can't focus and concentrate on a book because you've got stuff going on. And sometimes that can be something sadly that continues for a period of time. Sometimes it may only be for a day or an hour or whatever. But there will be times when your brain just isn't cooperating and won't let you read. And my advice in those situations would be don't sweat it. I mean, maybe try reading something really easy and seeing if that works for you. I think short story collections are really good for when you're slumpy because they tend to, short stories are by nature short, which means you don't have to concentrate very long to get all the meaning out of them. But equally, if you are reading a short story and you can't concentrate on it, you get to the end of it, it's not like you don't have to go back and start it again from the beginning. You just move on to the next story. You have a reset, move on to the next story and see how that one works for you. But yeah, if that doesn't work, if reading something light and fluffy doesn't work, something you would normally enjoy doesn't work, just don't worry about it. Don't try and read for a couple of days. Do something else instead. Watch some trashy TV, play a video game, whatever. Don't beat yourself up about not being able to read in the same way you shouldn't beat yourself up about, not understanding difficult books. I think sometimes as readers we can be too hard on ourselves because we love the hobby, because it's part of us. I think when you're a passionate reader, it's part of who you are. It's not just something you do, it's who you are. So it can feel really difficult when you can't do that thing for a period of time. But sometimes you just have to accept that's the way life is at that moment. You'll come back to it. Your brain will reset itself. You'll get that reading mojo back and you'll be able to read again. So yeah, those are my tips for avoiding reading slumps and getting out of reading slumps if you fall into them. And basically they all boil down to the same piece of advice, which is don't beat yourself up. So I hope you found that interesting. Do let me know in the comments your tips for avoiding and getting out of reading slumps. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.